Elena fell heavily to her knees on the freezing, wet pavement, clutching a scuffed, ruined designer purse against her chest as the heavy rain violently washed away her tears. Just 3 years ago, she had made the most heartless decision of her entire life. She had coldly traded her fiercely loyal, aging golden retriever to a seemingly penniless old stranger, just so she could afford a limited edition handbag to impress her toxic, wealthy friends. She thought she was finally upgrading her life. She thought unconditional love was worthless compared to high-end fashion. But as her shallow, superficial world violently collapsed around her, Elena stared up at the massive, glowing billboard towering over the city square. Featured on the screen, looking healthy, radiant, and dripping in absolute luxury, was the exact same dog she had thrown away like garbage, now the beloved famous face of a multi-million-dollar empire. And the absolute worst part of her waking nightmare? The ultra-wealthy billionaire stepping out of the sleek black limousine right in front of her was the exact same penniless old man she had so viciously mocked. And he was about to hand her a devastating, life-shattering truth she would never, ever recover from. Welcome back to Moments and Meanings. Before we uncover the heartbreaking twist in today's story, take a quick second to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below, have you ever seen someone throw away true loyalty just to impress the wrong people? In a world entirely obsessed with social media status, flashing wealth, and shiny new things, it is terrifyingly easy for superficial people to forget the absolute, priceless value of unconditional love. Today, we are diving into a deeply emotional, high-stakes story about a vain young woman who genuinely believed a designer handbag was more valuable than the childhood dog who loved her. But the devastating lesson she is about to learn about loyalty, karma, and true hidden wealth will completely change how you view the things that matter most in this world. Let's begin. Elena was a 24-year-old woman whose entire existence was exclusively measured by social media likes, luxury brand logos, and the toxic approval of people who didn't actually care about her. She lived in a tiny, heavily overpriced apartment in the city's most affluent district, drowning in maxed-out credit cards just to maintain the illusion of massive wealth. Her closet was bursting with expensive clothes she couldn't afford, yet she constantly complained that she had absolutely nothing to wear. But of all the things in Elena's superficial life that she considered outdated or embarrassing, nothing annoyed her more than Barnaby. Barnaby was a 10-year-old golden retriever, with a graying muzzle, a gentle, soulful gaze, and a slight limp in his back left leg. Elena's parents had given him to her when she was 14. For years, Barnaby had been her absolute best friend, sleeping at the foot of her bed, licking away her teenage tears, and offering the kind of pure, unconditional loyalty that money could never buy. But as Elena grew older and deeply obsessed with her online aesthetic, Barnaby had slowly transitioned from a beloved family member to a humiliating burden. He was no longer a cute, photogenic puppy she could post on her feed. He was slow. He shed heavily on her expensive clothes. He required expensive veterinary diets that cut into her shopping budget. On a brisk, sunny Tuesday afternoon, Elena was impatiently walking Barnaby through the ultra-exclusive pathways of Luminary Park. She wore oversized designer sunglasses and aggressively yanked on Barnaby's frayed nylon leash every time the old dog stopped to sniff the grass. "Come on, Barnaby. Move." Elena hissed loudly, checking her reflection in her phone screen. "You are moving at a glacial pace, and you are completely ruining my outfit. I don't have time for this." Barnaby simply wagged his tail, looking up at her with eyes full of absolute adoration, completely oblivious to her cruel resentment. Suddenly, a high-pitched, incredibly fake squeal pierced the air. "Elena. Oh my gosh. Look at you." Walking down the pristine paved path were Serafina and Cressida, Elena's two extremely wealthy, profoundly toxic friends. They were the apex predators of their social circle, constantly dripping in diamonds and judging everyone who fell below their impossible standards. But Elena's eyes didn't focus on their faces. Her gaze violently locked onto the item dangling from Serafina's arm. It was the Aura Noir, a heavily waitlisted, limited edition designer handbag made of midnight blue python leather with a solid gold clasp. It cost exactly $5,000, and owning it was the ultimate, undeniable symbol of high society elite status. Elena felt a sickening wave of pure, unadulterated jealousy wash over her chest. "Serafina, Is that the new Aura Noir? Elena gasped, practically drooling over the piece of leather. How did you even get one? The waitlist is 6 months long. My father called the boutique manager, Serafina bragged, flipping her perfect blonde hair with a toxic smirk. They only made 50 of them in the entire world. Cressida is buying hers tomorrow. You absolutely have to get one, Elena. We can be a matching trio for the gala this weekend. Elena's stomach violently dropped. She didn't have $5,000. She barely had $50 in her checking account. But her massive, fragile ego absolutely refused to admit she was broke. Oh, absolutely, Elena lied smoothly, forcing a bright smile. I was just planning on picking mine up this week. Cressida suddenly pinched her nose, looking down at Barnaby with extreme disgust. The old golden retriever had happily ambled over to sniff her expensive designer heels. Ugh, Elena, get this dirty thing away from me. Cressida sneered, kicking her foot back. Why do you still drag this ancient shedding creature around? He smells like wet cardboard. He completely ruins your aesthetic. You need a teacup poodle, not a giant, crippled liability. Instead of fiercely defending the loyal dog who had loved her for a decade, Elena felt a deep, humiliating flush of embarrassment. She aggressively yanked Barnaby's leash, pulling the old dog away so hard he stumbled. I know. Elena agreed desperately, throwing her dog entirely under the bus just to appease her cruel friends. He's a nightmare. He costs me a fortune in vet bills. Honestly, I wish I could just get rid of him. Barnaby let out a soft, confused whine, his ears dropping. As the toxic trio laughed, entirely ignoring the dog's feelings, an older man slowly walked over from a nearby park bench. He was dressed in a highly faded, heavily patched tweed coat, scuffed brown boots, and a worn-out flat cap. To Elena's superficial eyes, he looked like a penniless, homeless beggar who slept in the dirt. The old man knelt down on the pavement, ignoring Elena completely, and gently held out a weathered hand to Barnaby. The dog instantly lit up, stepping forward and nuzzling his graying muzzle happily into the man's palm. Well, aren't you a beautiful, perfect soul? The old man murmured, his voice rich and incredibly kind as he gently scratched behind Barnaby's ears. A golden heart wrapped in golden fur. You are a priceless treasure, yes you are. Elena's upper lip curled in profound disgust. She took a massive step back, as if the old man was carrying a highly infectious disease. Excuse me, Elena snapped viciously, her voice dripping with toxic entitlement. Do not touch my dog with your filthy hands. You probably have fleas. The old man slowly looked up. His eyes were a piercing, striking shade of silver blue, carrying a heavy, undeniable wisdom that seemed completely out of place with his shabby clothing. A dog's love is the purest wealth a human can ever possess, young lady, the old man said quietly, offering Elena a gentle, knowing look. You should be incredibly grateful for his loyalty. Because out of everything you are wearing right now, he is the only thing of actual, undeniable value. Serafina and Cressida burst into loud, mocking laughter. Did this homeless guy just try to give you life advice? Serafina cackled. Let's go, Elena. The smell of poverty is giving me a migraine. Elena fiercely yanked Barnaby away from the old man's gentle hands, her face flushed with toxic rage. Keep your pathetic advice to yourself, old man, she spat. Value is defined by a price tag. And you clearly couldn't afford a single thread on my body. The old man didn't get angry. He simply stayed on his knees, watching Elena drag the loyal, limping dog away toward the wealthy shopping district. Price tags can be bought, Thaddeus whispered softly to himself, his silver eyes narrowing slightly. But a soul can only be sold. Elena proudly marched away, completely convinced she was vastly superior to the shabby stranger. She had absolutely no idea that this homeless man was actually Thaddeus Sterling, a highly reclusive, multi-billionaire real estate tycoon. And she had no idea that her toxic desperation for a $5,000 purse was about to push her into committing the ultimate, unforgivable betrayal. Elena aggressively paced the cramped, scuffed hardwood floors of her tiny apartment, her phone pressed tightly to her ear. It was Wednesday afternoon and the massive high society gala was exactly 3 days away. I know, Serafina, I know. Elena lied smoothly, chewing frantically on her manicured thumbnail. My Aura Noir purse is completely secured. I'm literally going to the boutique to pick it up this afternoon. Yes, we will look absolutely flawless together. Okay. Bye. Elena violently ended the call and threw her phone onto the cheap sofa. She let out a scream of pure, toxic frustration. She didn't have the purse. She didn't even have a fraction of the money required to buy it. She had spent the last 12 hours desperately applying for high-interest personal loans and begging credit card companies to increase her limits, but every single application had been ruthlessly denied. She was completely, utterly broke. Stop looking at me like that. Elena suddenly shrieked. Sitting in the corner of the small living room was Barnaby. The old golden retriever was looking up at her with his big, soulful brown eyes, his tail giving a soft, hesitant thump against the floor. He could sense her severe distress, and like the fiercely loyal companion he was, he slowly limped over and gently rested his graying muzzle against her knee, offering her silent comfort. Elena felt absolutely zero warmth. She felt only profound, selfish irritation. Get away from me, you walking vet bill. Elena snapped, aggressively shoving the dog's head away. If I hadn't spent $600 on your stupid arthritis medication last month, I would have my deposit for the purse. You are completely ruining my life. Barnaby let out a soft, heartbreaking whimper, lowering his head and slowly limping back to his worn-out dog bed. Desperate, frantic, and entirely consumed by her toxic vanity, Elena grabbed Barnaby's frayed leash. She needed to get out of the apartment. She needed to think of a way to secure exactly $5,000 before the boutique closed. Or her wealthy friends would discover she was a complete fraud and permanently banish her from their elite circle. 20 minutes later, Elena was violently dragging Barnaby through Luminary Park again. She was aggressively typing on her phone, trying to see if there was a luxury pawn shop nearby that would buy her fake designer jewelry. $5,000, Elena muttered bitterly to herself, yanking the leash as Barnaby tried to stop and rest his aching leg. I just need 5,000 pathetic dollars, and my entire life will be perfect. That is a very specific and very shallow number. Elena froze. She angrily snapped her head up. Sitting on the exact same park bench as the day before was the homeless old man. Thaddeus was wearing the exact same faded tweed coat and flat cap, casually tossing breadcrumbs to a flock of pigeons. Excuse me? Elena spat, her eyes narrowing with toxic disgust. Are you stalking me, you creepy old beggar? I told you yesterday to stay away from me. Thaddeus slowly stood up. He completely ignored Elena's venomous insult, his striking silver blue eyes locking entirely onto Barnaby. The old dog was panting heavily, clearly exhausted from being dragged so ruthlessly. I am not stalking you, young lady, Thaddeus said quietly, his voice carrying an unexpected heavy weight of authority. I am simply observing a tragedy. That dog has given you a decade of pure, unadulterated loyalty. And you treat him like a piece of garbage stuck to your shoe. He is garbage. Elena yelled, entirely losing her temper in the middle of the park. He is old, he is ugly, and he is a massive financial burden. I would give absolutely anything to be rid of him so I could actually afford the things I deserve. Thaddeus went completely still. The gentle, grandfatherly aura around him instantly evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating intensity. Anything? Thaddeus asked softly. Yes. Elena screamed, blinded by her own greed. Thaddeus slowly reached into the deep inner pocket of his faded tweed coat. Elena expected him to pull out a dirty tissue or a piece of trash. Instead, she physically gasped, her eyes widening in absolute paralyzing shock. The penniless beggar pulled out a massive, tightly bound stack of crisp, perfectly pristine $100 bills. It was more cash than Elena had ever seen in her entire life. I will make you a very simple, very final transaction, Thaddeus stated, his voice completely devoid of emotion as he held the massive stack of money out toward her. I will give you exactly $5,000. Right here. Right now. In cash. Elena's heart completely stopped. Her greedy eyes were entirely glued to the money. For what? For him, Thaddeus said, pointing a weathered finger at Barnaby. You hand me that leash, you take this money, and you walk away. You will permanently surrender all ownership. You will never see him again. You will never ask about him again, and you will completely erase him from your memory. Elena's mind violently raced. $5,000. It was the exact, to the penny amount she needed to buy the Aura Noir purse. It was her golden ticket to absolute social perfection. All she had to do was trade her childhood best friend, the loyal dog who had loved her unconditionally for 10 years, to a complete stranger in the park. It was the ultimate, unforgivable point of no return. Barnaby looked up at Alina. He let out a soft, trusting whine, his tail wagging slowly. He had absolutely no idea that the person he loved most in the world was currently pricing his soul. Elena didn't hesitate. She didn't feel a single microscopic shred of guilt or hesitation. "Deal," Elena said coldly. She aggressively snatched the massive stack of cash from Thaddeus's hand, instantly shoving the frayed nylon leash into his weathered palm. Barnaby jolted. He looked deeply confused as the leash transferred to the stranger. As Elena immediately turned her back and began practically sprinting away toward the luxury shopping district, Barnaby let out a loud, panicked bark. He tried to run after her, his bad leg heavily limping, but the leash pulled taut. He barked again, a desperate, heartbreaking sound of pure betrayal. He was crying out for the girl he had protected since she was 14. Elena didn't even turn around. She didn't say goodbye. She just tightly clutched the money to her chest, a massive, toxic smile stretching across her face. An hour later, Elena confidently strutted out of the ultra-exclusive luxury boutique. Dangling proudly from her arm was the Aura Noir handbag. The midnight blue python leather shined brightly in the afternoon sun, and the solid gold clasp felt heavy and powerful. She met Serafina and Cressida for a wildly expensive lunch. They violently squealed over the purse, completely validating Elena's toxic ego. She felt entirely invincible. She was finally one of the elite. She had traded a useless, crippled dog for the ultimate symbol of wealth, and she genuinely believed she had won the lottery. She had absolutely no idea that the $5,000 wasn't a blessing. It was a terrifying, deliberate test designed by a billionaire to expose her rotten core. And by choosing the purse over her loyal dog, Elena had just triggered a catastrophic countdown to her own total, inescapable destruction. 3 agonizing years had passed since Elena had ruthlessly sold her childhood best friend for a piece of python leather, and her shallow, superficial world had completely, violently collapsed. Karma is a patient but fiercely unforgiving teacher. Elena quickly learned that the loyalty you buy with money vanishes the exact second the money runs out. 6 months after she bought the Aura Noir purse, the fashion trend completely died. The purse was declared tacky and outdated by the social media elite, and just like the purse, Elena was aggressively discarded. The moment her massive mountain of credit card debt finally caught up to her and her cards began loudly declining at luxury brunches, Serafina and Cressida instantly blocked her number. They didn't offer to help her. They didn't even say goodbye. They simply replaced her with another wealthy, vapid girl, completely erasing Elena from their toxic social circle. Now, at 27 years old, Elena was a broken, terrified shell of the arrogant girl she used to be. She had been brutally evicted from her affluent apartment. She was working grueling, back-breaking double shifts as a waitress in a cheap diner just to afford a tiny, moldy room on the worst side of the city. It was a freezing, miserably dark Friday evening. A torrential downpour was aggressively hammering the city streets. Elena was trudging through the wealthy Luminary district, the exact same neighborhood she used to aggressively parade Barnaby through. She was wearing cheap, heavily worn-out sneakers and a thin, soaking wet jacket. Clutched desperately to her chest, acting as a pathetic shield against the freezing rain, was the Aura Noir handbag. It was utterly unrecognizable. The once gleaming midnight blue python leather was deeply scratched, peeling, and heavily water-damaged. The solid gold clasp had violently snapped off a year ago, replaced by a cheap safety pin. The bag that had cost her her absolute soul now held nothing but past-due electricity bills and a handful of loose diner tips. It was completely, entirely worthless. Elena's worn-out sneakers slipped on the wet pavement. She fell heavily to her knees, the freezing, dirty puddle soaking through her cheap jeans. The Aura Noir purse fell into the muddy water. Elena didn't even have the energy to scream. She just knelt there in the freezing rain, completely broken, sobbing hysterically as she stared at the ruined piece of garbage that had cost her everything. In the suffocating darkness of her misery, she finally realized the horrifying truth. Barnaby was the only living creature on Earth that had ever actually loved her. And she had traded him for a leather bag that couldn't even keep her warm. Suddenly, A massive burst of blinding, pristine white light cut through the rainy darkness, illuminating the entire city square. Elena slowly lifted her tear-stained face. Towering 80 feet above the luxury shopping district was a massive, ultra-high-definition digital billboard. The advertisement was for the Sterling Empire, the most elite, multi-billion-dollar luxury real estate and lifestyle brand in the world. But it wasn't the sparkling skyscrapers on the screen that made Elena's heart violently stop in her chest. It was the mascot sitting proudly in the center of the screen. It was a golden retriever. But not just any golden retriever, it was Barnaby. Elena gasped, aggressively wiping the heavy rain from her eyes. It was undeniably him. She recognized the unique white patch of fur on his chest. But he looked completely transformed. His coat was masterfully groomed, thick and shining like spun gold. His eyes were bright and incredibly healthy. He was sitting tall and proud, wearing a breathtaking custom-made collar encrusted with real diamonds and sapphire stones. Beneath his majestic image, massive bold letters read, "The Sterling Empire, where loyalty is our greatest wealth." "Barnaby?" Elena choked out, her voice trembling with absolute paralyzing shock. How is that possible? Before her mind could even process the impossible image on the billboard, a massive, sleek, multi-million-dollar custom black Rolls-Royce silently glided up to the curb, violently splashing a wave of freezing, dirty puddle water directly onto Elena's ruined purse. The luxury vehicle parked directly in front of the massive, glowing entrance of the Luminary Grand Hotel. Just 10 feet away from where Elena was kneeling in the dirt, a chauffeur quickly jumped out, holding a massive, heavy black umbrella. He respectfully opened the rear passenger door. Stepping out of the luxury vehicle was the exact same older man from the park, but he was no longer wearing a faded, dirty tweed coat and scuffed boots. Thaddeus Sterling was draped in a breathtaking, bespoke midnight black billionaire's tuxedo. He radiated absolute, terrifying wealth, power, and untouchable authority. And then, stepping gracefully out of the Rolls-Royce right behind him, walking without a single trace of a limp, was Barnaby. The old dog looked even more majestic in person, his diamond collar sparkling blindingly under the hotel's canopy lights. He was tethered to Thaddeus by a stunning, solid gold chain leash. Thaddeus didn't yank the leash. He didn't rush the dog. He gently placed a warm, loving hand on Barnaby's head, treating the animal with the absolute reverence of royalty. Elena was completely paralyzed. The homeless beggar she had viciously mocked was a legendary billionaire. The worthless, crippled dog she had aggressively thrown away was now living a life of unimaginable absolute luxury. Trembling violently, Elena slowly pushed herself up from the freezing puddle. She clutched her ruined, muddy purse to her chest, her heart hammering against her ribs as she took a desperate, pathetic step toward the glowing hotel entrance, entirely unprepared for the devastating, life-shattering confrontation that was about to occur. The freezing, torrential rain violently lashed against Elena's fragile frame as she stumbled out of the suffocating darkness and into the blindingly bright, pristine glow of the Luminary Grand Hotel's canopy. She looked absolutely horrific. Her cheap clothes were completely soaked in muddy puddle water. Her hair was plastered to her face, and her ruined, safety-pinned Aura Noir purse was clutched pathetically to her chest. She was the absolute picture of rock-bottom desperation. "Barnaby," Elena cried out, her voice cracking with violent, desperate emotion. "Barnaby, it's me." Instantly, two massive, highly intimidating private security guards in sharp black suits stepped directly into Elena's path, aggressively raising their hands to block the soaking wet waitress from getting anywhere near the billionaire. But Thaddeus Sterling simply raised a single, calm, white, gloved hand. "Stand down, gentlemen," Thaddeus commanded, his voice echoing with absolute, terrifying authority over the sound of the heavy rain. "I know this young woman. Or rather, I knew the person she used to be." The guards immediately stepped aside, though their eyes remained fiercely locked on Elena. Elena's heart hammered violently against her ribs. She completely ignored the billionaire. Her desperate, tear-filled eyes were entirely focused on the majestic golden retriever standing proudly by Thaddeus's side. She expected Barnaby to completely lose his mind. She expected him to bark with absolute joy, violently break away from his solid gold leash, and tackle her to the ground with unconditional love, just like he used to do when she came home from high school. She desperately needed him to validate her. She needed him to prove that someone in this miserable, lonely world still loved her. "Barnaby, come here, boy," Elena sobbed, dropping to her knees on the pristine hotel driveway and holding her trembling, muddy arms wide open. "I'm so sorry. Mommy's right here." But Barnaby didn't run to her. He didn't even wag his tail. The old dog simply stood completely still, the blinding diamonds on his custom collar sparkling in the canopy lights. He looked at Alana with calm, deeply intelligent brown eyes. He tilted his head slightly, as if he were looking at a complete stranger. And then, in a move that completely, utterly shattered Alana's remaining soul, Barnaby calmly turned his head away from her and gently leaned his majestic body against Thaddeus's expensive tuxedo leg, seeking comfort from his true master. Alina let out a loud, agonizing gasp, as if she had just been violently stabbed in the chest. He doesn't remember me." Alina choked out, hot tears streaming down her freezing, muddy face. "He remembers you perfectly, Elena," Thaddeus stated coldly, his striking silver blue eyes piercing right through her toxic facade. "Dogs have flawless memories. He remembers exactly who aggressively yanked his leash when his leg was in agonizing pain. He remembers exactly who yelled at him for shedding. And he remembers exactly who traded his 10 years of unconditional loyalty to a complete stranger for a stack of paper money." Elena violently flinched. The absolute truth of his words crushed her. "I made a mistake," Elena wailed hysterically, desperately trying to play the victim. "I was young. I was completely brainwashed by my toxic friends. They told me I needed that purse to be someone. I didn't know you were a billionaire. If I had known you were Thaddeus Sterling, I never would have taken that money. And that right there is the absolute rotten core of your tragedy," Thaddeus replied, his voice devoid of any pity. "You only care about who I am now because you see the Rolls Royce and the diamond collar. 3 years ago, when I was sitting on that park bench in a faded tweed coat, you looked at me like I was a diseased rat. You judged my entire existence by the price tag on my clothes." Thaddeus took a slow, deliberate step forward. The sheer, intimidating presence of the billionaire made Elena physically cower in the dirt. "You thought I was a penniless beggar," Thaddeus continued, his voice echoing with devastating power. "But I own the very ground you are kneeling on. I own this hotel. I own this entire luxury district. I was sitting in that park wearing my late grandfather's old coat simply because I wanted to enjoy the fresh air without being swarmed by greedy, superficial parasites like you." Elena sobbed, frantically clutching the ruined, muddy Ora Noir purse against her chest. "But I watched you," Thaddeus revealed, dropping the ultimate, life-shattering twist. "I watched you ruthlessly abuse an animal whose only crime was loving you. When I offered you that $5,000, it wasn't a business transaction, Elena. It was a test of your soul. I intentionally offered you the exact price of that shallow, meaningless handbag. I wanted to see if there was even a microscopic shred of humanity left inside you to say no." Elena violently shook her head, drowning in profound regret. "I was broke. He was costing me a fortune in vet bills for his crippled leg. I couldn't afford to fix him." Thaddeus let out a sharp, deeply disgusted laugh that cut completely to the bone. "His leg wasn't crippled, Elena," Thaddeus stated, dropping the final, devastating hammer. "When I took Barnaby to my private veterinary team, they took one single X-ray. He had a minor, easily treatable joint impingement. The surgery cost exactly $1,000. $1,000 to completely end his pain. But you refused to pay it, didn't you? Because that exact same month, you spent $1,200 on fake designer shoes just to impress women who completely abandoned you the second your credit cards declined." Elena's jaw dropped. The air violently vanished from her lungs. Barnaby hadn't been an expensive burden. He had simply needed a fraction of the money she was aggressively blowing on useless, superficial garbage. She looked at Barnaby's back legs. He was standing perfectly straight. He wasn't in pain anymore. He was healthy, strong, and deeply loved. Thaddeus had given him the life he actually deserved. "You traded a priceless, golden heart for a dead piece of snakeskin," Thaddeus said coldly, looking down at the ruined, muddy purse in Elena's hands. "And now, the snake skin is rotting in the mud, and the golden heart is living in a palace." Elena was entirely backed into a corner with absolutely no escape. Her toxic ego was completely obliterated. She had thrown away the only true wealth she had ever possessed, and she was entirely, permanently too late to get it back. Elena remained frozen on her knees in the freezing dirty puddle, the torrential rain violently washing away the last microscopic shreds of her toxic pride. She looked down at the ruined, waterlogged Aura Noir purse in her trembling hands, the exact item she had traded her soul for, and then looked up at the majestic, radiant golden retriever who had once loved her unconditionally. "Please, Miss Sterling," Elena begged, her voice cracking into a pathetic, agonizing wail. "I have absolutely nothing. My friends abandoned me, I have no money, I have no home. Barnaby is the only family I have left. Please, let me have him back. I'll change. I promise I will change." Thaddeus looked down at the weeping, broken waitress with eyes entirely devoid of sympathy. "You do not want him back because you love him, Elena," Thaddeus stated, his voice echoing with absolute, undeniable truth. "You want him back because you are lonely, and he was the only creature on this earth willing to tolerate your toxic, selfish heart. But true loyalty is a highly fragile gift. Once you sell it, you can never, ever buy it back." Thaddeus gently tugged on the solid gold leash. Barnaby didn't even look back at Elena. The old dog happily turned and trotted beside the billionaire, walking toward the blindingly bright, incredibly warm entrance of the Luminary Grand Hotel. "Wait. Barnaby, please." Elena screamed hysterically, trying to crawl forward in the freezing mud. But the two massive security guards instantly stepped forward, forming an impenetrable, terrifying wall of muscle in front of her. "Do not take another step, miss," one of the guards warned coldly. "You need to leave the property immediately, or you will be arrested for trespassing." Elena completely collapsed against the wet pavement, sobbing uncontrollably as she watched Thaddeus and Barnaby disappear through the towering glass doors of the luxury hotel. The doors heavily swung shut, completely sealing off the warmth, the wealth and the unconditional love she had so viciously thrown away. She was left entirely alone in the suffocating darkness of the freezing rain, clutching a piece of rotting snakeskin. The aftermath of Elena's horrific choice proved to be a lifelong, agonizing punishment. While Barnaby spent his golden years living in absolute breathtaking luxury, sleeping on custom-made orthopedic beds, eating meals prepared by private, five-star chefs, and receiving endless affection from a man who truly valued his golden heart, Elena's superficial life continued to violently spiral into total ruin. A year later, Elena was still working grueling double-shift hours at the greasy diner, wearing a heavily stained uniform and smelling constantly of fried oil. Her toxic vanity had entirely destroyed her future. One brutally busy Sunday afternoon, the bell above the diner door chimed loudly. Elena grabbed a dirty rag and a menu, rushing over to seat the new customers. But as she approached the booth, the air violently vanished from her lungs. Sitting in the booth were Serafina and Cressida. They were dripping in brand-new, limited-edition designer jewelry, loudly laughing and aggressively complaining about the disgusting, cheap smell of the diner. Elena froze in absolute, paralyzing terror. She desperately tried to hide her face behind the menu. She couldn't let her old friends see her like this. She couldn't let them know she was a broke, miserable waitress. "Excuse me," Serafina snapped viciously, not even looking up from her diamond-encrusted phone. "Can we get some water? We're parched, and you're just standing there breathing heavily. It's incredibly unprofessional." Elena's hands trembled violently. She looked at Serafina, the girl she had destroyed her own life to impress. But Serafina's eyes quickly completely glazed over Elena. There was no recognition. There was no memory. To Serafina, Elena wasn't a former friend, she was just an invisible, worthless servant. Elena had literally traded her childhood dog to impress women who didn't even recognize her face without expensive makeup and a designer purse. Tears of pure agonizing regret violently streamed down Elena's face. She dropped the menus on the table and ran into the back kitchen, completely breaking down in the corner next to the garbage cans. Meanwhile, across the city, Barnaby's legacy was becoming immortal. Thaddeus Sterling officially launched the Barnaby Sterling Animal Foundation, a multi-million-dollar charity dedicated entirely to rescuing senior and disabled dogs. Barnaby became the famous, beloved face of the charity, his beautiful golden face plastered on billboards worldwide, proving that every single animal has priceless, immeasurable value. When Barnaby eventually passed away peacefully in his sleep at 15 years old, he was surrounded by immense love, absolute comfort, and a billionaire who held his paw until the very last second. But Elena remained entirely alone. Every night, she returned to her tiny, moldy apartment, absolutely exhausted and deeply miserable. And every night she would stare at the completely ruined, waterlogged Aura Noir purse sitting on her cheap dresser. Forever haunted by the devastating truth, she had traded a heart of pure gold for a piece of garbage, and she would spend the rest of her life paying the absolute price. The lesson in this story: we currently live in a deeply toxic society that constantly trains us to value the absolute wrong things. We are brainwashed into believing that designer labels, luxury cars, and the approval of superficial people are the ultimate keys to happiness. But a price tag cannot buy loyalty. A designer purse cannot comfort you when you are crying. And the toxic friends who only love you for your money will be the very first ones to abandon you when you have absolutely nothing left. True wealth is not what you wear on your arm, it is the pure, unconditional love you hold in your life. If you throw away loyalty to chase status, you will eventually find yourself completely, terrifyingly alone. Every moment has a meaning, but not every truth is easy to face. If this lesson resonated with you, hit the like button and subscribe. Comment loyalty over luxury below if you believe that the unconditional love of a pet is absolutely priceless. This is Moments and Meanings by Anne, and I'll see you in the next story.